It's official, the new age of Street Fighter is now upon us. What's up folks, my name is Maximilian, and right now we're gonna look at all the details revealed in the gameplay trailer for Street Fighter V. Some stuff's gonna be a little theoretical, but right now let's start off with what we exactly know based off what we saw. As the trailer begins, we start to see a lot of similar moves and motions to previous Street Fighter games. Lightning kicks, Hadoukens, Shoryukens, and spinning bird kicks, this is all stuff we've seen before. But if you notice, the weight behind each attack seems to be quite different than previous titles. I'd say the overall speed that everything is moving is probably most similar to Street Fighter Cross Tekken version 2013. We then see the potential of what seems to be a much more lenient juggling system than previous Street Fighter titles. Only in a game like Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, after you stun your opponent, could you get a huge amount of juggle hits. But here, Chun-Li seems to go rather crazy, knocking her opponent into the ground after she's done. Where we see another returning mechanic from the Street Fighter Cross Tekken series, which is the ground bounce. She ground bounces her opponent after the top hit and continues to hit Ryu once after he's knocked off the ground. I don't really consider this as an OTG / off the ground move, which is very prominent from the Versus series, especially Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3. This is a lot more like the ground bounce state in Street Fighter Cross Tekken, which allows you to kind of continue the combo, but you only get a very few amount of hits after. We then get a sneak peek at Chun-Li doing an activation of some kind, very similar to N-Groove activations in Capcom vs. SNK 2, and every attack afterwards that she does seems to have this additional paint / blue effect with it, as well as all her special moves kind of having this unique EX property. She throws 2 Kokokens instead of 1. Her lightning legs then go into 2 separate sequences where she uses both of her legs instead of just one sequence like the regular special. Everything seems to be amplified in some way when she activates into this mode. Then of course we get the first glimpse at a super combo. We all know what these are from previous Street Fighter games. And then we see Chun-Li bringing Ryu back down to the ground, sort of recapturing them back into a standing state. However, I don't believe this to be the case, for this more looks like an editing cut to get Ryu to fly through the wall right after. As Ryu flies through the left-hand side of the stage, we're reminded that this is kind of the first time we've seen something like this in a regular Street Fighter title. The Versus series, X-Men Children of the Atom, these previous titles have a prominent vertical screen transition, and in Marvel vs. Capcom 1 you also saw a right side of the stage screen transition in the bathhouse. Ryu recovers after flying into a restaurant, but this place looks very similar to a location we saw in a Street Fighter Cross Tekken trailer a couple years ago. Anyway, he's pissed and he activates as well. His fireball is now super beefy and hits a multitude of times. Not to mention his EX Hurricane Kick has a very similar ink motif that we saw in the Street Fighter 4 series. And returning from previous Street Fighter titles is a mechanic known as guard crushes. Guard crushing hasn't existed in the majority of recently released Capcom titles, including Street Fighter Cross Tekken, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and Street Fighter 4. The last time we saw guard crushes initially in the Street Fighter series was back from the Street Fighter Alphas, as well as Capcom vs. SNK 2. But be sure not to confuse guard crushing with a stun gauge, where your character eventually gets stunned if they hit too much. In Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, we actually saw that each character had a stun gauge, which if it eventually reached to the top, the opponent would be stunned and they'd go into a dizzy state, allowing you for a free combo. A guard gauge more represents how many times you're able to block. Certain attacks add a small amount or a greater amount to the gauge, and if you block too much or you're too defensive in some of these older titles, especially CVS2, your guard eventually gets broken and is reset back to nothing. At that point, you're open for a free combo, which is exactly what happens to Chun-Li in this trailer. Even though this is a returning mechanic from a previous Street Fighter game, it's actually not from a mainline Street Fighter title. Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 3, and Street Fighter 4 never saw anything like this, so this is technically borrowing from the Street Fighter Alpha series. And he finally finishes off Chun-Li with a super Shinko Hadouken. But wait a minute, if you go back and actually listen to Ryu's dialogue, he's indeed saying, yep, it's Denjin Hadouken, the returning super art from Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, where Ryu throws an unblockable fireball if you charge it. Very curious why they added this in here, and it's actually cancelable from a low forward, which is even more curious, and it just leaves me wondering where the heck is the regular Shinko Hadouken. And that's everything that's fairly obvious. You look at all these mechanics and you can kind of pull this information and confirm that this is stuff that is indeed being here. Guard crushes, characters activating, moves getting manipulated after activation. This is all things that we can establish and how they're actually working. But let's take a look at some of the things that are more subdued about what's going on in this gameplay trailer. Again, to reiterate, this is not stuff that is confirmed I'm going to be talking about, but it's more stuff that there's enough notes and hints and secrets within this trailer to kind of lead me to believe that some of this stuff could be showing up in the game. The first biggest note is right at the beginning of the trailer when you see each character face off. They're represented by a 1-player and 2-player sign above their heads. Never before in a Street Fighter game have we seen this type of icon above each character. However, this stuff does prominently show up in many other Capcom titles, including the Versus series. And usually the only reason you would need to identify whether or not you're player 1 or player 2 is if your character's off screen at some point and you need to know where the other character is. Of course, we remember that Chun-Li brought Ryu into the air for a big kind of crazy aerial combo, but I don't think that's exactly it. This could actually be hinting towards something much different than what we're thinking. Even a tag-related mechanic. A lot of the times you need these notifications above each character's head to identify when things are moving fast, that's my character, that's what's going on, and that's who I am. So having this be at the very beginning of the trailer as the characters face off is fairly interesting. You might have to call in another character to help you out at some point, or switch between who starts a match. There's a lot of different things that this could be. It's just something that's never been in Street Fighter before, and it's kind of weird that it's here now. At many other points, we see Ryu holding a pose that is not the normal default pose Ryu usually has. It's more similar to his Street Fighter 3 Third Strike pose where he goes into his taunt. However, at every point when he's in this pose, he's kind of in a neutral standing state, and Chun-Li sort of kicks him in the head or punches him, and he doesn't really do much at all. A lot have speculated that this is a pose designed to parry, or it gives you a special other mechanic along with this pose. I don't believe so. I believe this is just a transition. When you have characters that sit in their default poses, they sort of do this animation to show you that they're kind of ready for battle, even though you're not controlling what they're doing. And I believe that's exactly what's happening with Ryu here. For some reason, he's just not transitioning back to his default position, most likely because the game is very early. The activation mechanic is also very interesting for each character, and I think they're trying to give us a few clues. When Chun-Li activates into whatever she's doing to give her moves this extra ability, this giant blue streak pops all around her. We immediately can kind of focus this to being something similar to Ryu, the ink effect, the paint effect. She's manipulating paint in some way, but I don't believe so. It more looks like water, like each character is activating an element of some kind. Once Chun-Li activates her water state, or whatever it might be, all of her moves are manipulated in a certain way, and her EX moves kind of get two different versions. Whenever we saw her do something after she activated, her one single Kokoken turned into a second Kokoken. Her lightning legs turned into two lightning legs. And if we can pull a conclusion from this, Chun-Li sort of activates her element and her special moves double over when she's in that element. And the reason this conclusion might be fairly valid is that Ryu does almost the exact same thing. Each character, when they are doing their EX moves at some point, have this ink effect, this black ink effect, but when Ryu does it, pay close attention to his arms. He's got electricity all around his arms, and every single attack afterwards, they are sort of electrified in some way, manipulating his attacks. So Ryu activates into his element, which is pretty much electricity, and Chun-Li activates into her element, which is water, which makes sense. I mean, I guess the way Chun-Li fights, it kind of flows like water, and the way Ryu does all of his stuff, it's always been represented by like lightning in the previous games. In Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo's intro, Ryu is always represented by like a bolt of lightning with the stuff he does, and of course Ken, when he's eventually revealed, I'm pretty sure is just going to be fire. However, Ryu's electricity element doesn't have the same properties as Chun-Li's water element. Ryu has a buffed out fireball that we see that hits multiple times, and that kind of makes sense because the electricity is related to the electricity going out of his hands. But everything else we see him do, between the uppercuts, between all the other stuff, it has electricity modifications on his arm, but doesn't do a similar thing. It isn't like he does two uppercuts. It isn't like he does multiple versions like Chun-Li's water thing. They have different properties, which is fairly interesting. I'm going to call it right now, these element activations for each character are probably going to be the new big thing about Street Fighter V. And this is very similar to another fighting game that I frequently covered on this channel, which is Killer Instinct, where characters activate into an instinct mode after they take some damage, and they get a small buff to certain properties of their moves, but not like a huge activation buff to everything and anything they are, including damage, speed, defense, and whatever, like X Factor in Marvel 3. It is a mechanic to kind of get you back into the fight, but it's not a mechanic exactly to win every fight like X Factor, and that's Instinct in Killer Instinct. And now we have this elemental activation in Street Fighter V, and it looks awfully similar, I'm not gonna lie. But outside of the normal electricity modification, giving him that big fireball, I think if we look at what's going on specifically when Ryu is attacking Chun-Li with normal attacks and specials, we can kind of deduct what this electricity is doing. As Chun-Li is blocking the normal attacks from Ryu, she gets guard crushed, and this might represent that when Ryu has activated, his moves have special properties and potentially does more guard crush or guard stun. The moves that he would normally execute are all amplified in some way, maybe in damage, maybe in guard stun, but since his arms are glowing, there's definitely something going on. The electricity is present now, and it wasn't present before when he was attacking Chun-Li at the beginning of the trailer. The one thing I think that kind of solidifies this is this very interesting Link combo that Ryu does to finish out the trailer. This does not look like a traditional chain combo you might have seen in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. And if I was to take a guess, Ryu jumps in with a heavy punch, does a close-range medium punch, then a far-range medium punch, a low forward canceled into his super. And that's much more representative of a Link combo, something that was very present in the Street Fighter IV series, not like a chain combo in Street Fighter Cross Tekken. But it's kind of a really weird Link combo. You don't really see that kind of Link combo in a lot of these games. Usually you see like light to medium, maybe medium to heavy or light to heavy. So it's a little interesting, and I'm just going to say it right now. Maybe the electricity modifications that come off Ryu are kind of similar to Jago's in Killer Instinct when he goes into his instinct, which gives him frame advantage on some moves. If you guys don't know what that means, it kind of makes each move easier to combo into the next move, and he finishes out the entire combo by doing that low forward into the super. A pretty interesting amount of mechanics presented in this trailer, as well as a lot of secrets I think they were trying to hide. But that's a good thing. We have no confirmation of any of this stuff yet, except it obviously has a guard crush and obviously has a ground bounce. But there appears to be a lot more stuff happening here, and we're going to get confirmation of it at Capcom Cup, hopefully in about a week. So stay tuned, guys. In that time, I'm going to be at Capcom Cup, and hopefully we can find out as much details and information about the mechanics of this game as possible, and we'll be back on this channel covering this stuff and any other Street Fighter news that pops up in the meantime. If you enjoyed the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up. My name is Maximilian, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.